Well, we're going to save the best for last. I have to say that because I'm the moderator, so I get to say that. But as we get into the last part of our segments here, one thing that people tend to overlook until sometimes it's too late is what kind of a mobile device are you going to choose to be able to actually move forward with a solution. And at Panasonic, we look at it as from a hardware perspective. In its own right, it's a solution, but in another perspective, it really isn't because we have to work with all of the different pieces that are out there. The different types of software, the different types of application, the different types of vehicles that are going to be utilized, and you have to tie it all together. But from a straight up hardware perspective, you also have to look at different things such as Wi-Fi technology, cellular technology, both on a voice as well as a data perspective. You have to consider things like barcode scanners. Barcodes, what kind are you going to use? How far do you have to scan? There's a lot of different pieces to the puzzle that all have to tie together. So as we're going through this, we could spend a huge amount of time on a very limited timetable going through it. So I've tried to pick 5 features that we think are important within the Panasonic circles anyway, that you should consider when choosing a mobile device, whether it's for your technicians, your drivers, or your salespeople, because equally each one of them is going to have a different set of experiences that needs to be addressed and answered to. So let's talk about, first of all, easy operation with gloves. Now, people think, well, a glove is a glove, but in real life, when you take a look at it, there's 1 mil thick gloves and they're cotton. There's other gloves like you see here, which are made out of rubber and are a lot of time used for caustic materials handling and are maybe 3 mils thick. And then, of course, you even have your winter gloves that might be 5 mils thick or 10 mils thick, depending on what weather patterns you're working in. And based on that, every one of those things has a different function. And whether it's signing, whether it's hitting a button to access an application, or however this all ties together, having the proper type of device that handles your specific application should definitely be answered at the front end. And while we're talking about that, don't forget the battery life, because that's equally important. If you're thinking about it, a battery life of 4 hours might just be fine, might be perfectly fine for what you're trying to do. But consider the fact that if a person's out on a route for 6 hours or 12 hours, or even in some cases during the extremely heavy seasonal times, maybe up to 18 hours, having a battery that can actually answer those challenges and requirements is extremely important to the success of your operation. So tie all that together as you're making decisions so that you're putting the true round peg in the round hole rather than vice versa. So let's talk about it from another perspective, and that's about easy operation in rain. A lot of devices nowadays do have rain touch capabilities. And as you can kind of see here, that could be very well important because of the fact that every time raindrops hit a screen, the potential is there for it to either access a wrong application, activate a wrong application, or it just doesn't flat work at all. Creates a huge problem. So whether you want it to be let it rain, get the umbrella, or the last part of it, the idea, again, is take this into account and make sure that the device that you've chosen actually handles operation in rain if that's required. The other side, too, is equally important, and that's direct sunlight. Anybody that owns a consumer-grade device understands that when you're out in a parking lot and the sun's shining directly down on you, it is darn near impossible to read the screen unless you're putting your hand in front of the device, doing different things to make it readable. So if a company is choosing a device and it's going to require the use in direct sunlight, make sure that you've picked a screen that's capable of reading in direct sunlight as well. Of course, those are some of the functional parts, rain, gloves, things of that nature, but the device also has to survive. And we say at Panasonic that durability counts, and that's why we've got the name TOUGHBOOK. So the idea is your device is going to get dry. It could be 5 feet to concrete, it could be 6 feet to concrete, it could be 8 feet to concrete, and it all depends on what tool you're using to make your deliveries. You take a look at this guy that's sitting up there in the cab of a truck. He gets out of the truck, the device falls out of his pocket, the mobile terminal, and it could be an 8-foot drop to concrete. You go to the other side of it, and you may have somebody that's doing it from a different perspective, and they're going to drop it a lot of different times. Take a look at a delivery driver that's doing home deliveries. They probably are doing 100 deliveries a day, and every time they get out of their vehicle, they have the tendency to be able to at least drop their device onto the ground while they're carrying and juggling boxes, getting signatures and things of that nature. So from that perspective, can it be dropped 1,000 times, 3 feet? Well, they may not ever have to drop it 1,000 times, but let's say they drop it 100 times or 200 times. Can it survive those small drops just as well as it can provide the big drops? And finally, if something's going to happen, it probably will. Excuse me, and as you can see here, if you don't think it could get worse, it usually does, and that means that at that point in time, a lot of different damages can occur. So it isn't about just dropping the device, but more even so about dropping things on the device, and these are things that you need to take into account. I've seen incidences where somebody's actually lowered a pallet accidentally onto one of the mobile devices. And lo and behold, they picked it back up and it didn't work so well. I've seen other areas where somebody has flat dropped a sledgehammer on a device that was laying on a bench, and lo and behold, it actually worked after they picked it up. So analyze the area that you're working in, make sure that you've got the ability to have the right product in the right place at the right time so that you have true survivability built into your system. And that leads us to the last part. So I think the whole idea becomes, and my screen just froze up here. There we go. And that becomes the idea that if you're going to have increased durability in the device, it's going to equal longer longevity. And of course, the longer that you can use a mobile device, then the longer and the better your return on, or the higher your return on investment is. If you take a look at it, every time one of your mobile devices fails, it takes 6 hours on the average of manpower to correct the problem. Now that means you've got a driver perhaps that has to return and pick up a new device. You've got an IT person that has to do analysis. You have an operations person that may have to get it packed up, shipped into wherever the repair facility is. There's a lot of things that happen. So on the average, that'll take you about 6 hours of your time. And that's 6 hours that can be well spent on a lot of different areas. Take a look at your annual failure rates because of this. And what you can see that if you go across all the devices within the industry, whether they're rugged or not rugged, you can kind of look at about an 18% down to a 14% annual failure rate. What does that mean to you in your planning? Well, if you're using day-to-day consumer-grade devices or devices that aren't categorized as rugged, then what you're going to have to plan in is that for every 100 units that you have, you're going to need anywhere from 14 to 18 spares to be able to account for the devices that are out of play at any given time back in the shop for repairs. The other side of that is even the truly rugged devices sometimes aren't as rugged as you would hope. So the average for the industry on a rugged device, if it's a notebook, is 12%, and if it's a handheld, it's 10%. So again, you run into those areas that it creates issues. Finally, if you want to take a hard look at completely rugged devices, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, TOUGHBOOK kind of earned that title TOUGHBOOK for one reason. You take a look at the failure rates on our notebooks and on our tablets and on our handhelds, and what you can see is that the idea that you need 2% sparing instead of 20% sparing, again, increases your return on investment and lowers your total cost of ownership.